I'm sorry to tell you, every year is not your year. It's not going to be a year. And it's supposed to not be your year. If every season was a harvest season, when would the season be for sowing? Welcome back to Faith Phase, where I'm your host, Faith, and I'm just here to help you to elevate your life through practical and spiritual tips. Now, this week, we are talking about why it may not be your season. And I know a lot of the times, like even on like New Year's Eve services, if you are a churchgoer, New Year's Eve services are notorious for saying, "This is my year. 2024 is my year. 2023 is my year." Whatever year that you're going into, we oftentimes say, "This is my year. This is the year it's going to happen. I feel it. This is my year." And I'm here to be the bearer of bad news. Like, okay, maybe not a bearer of bad news, but just to kind of give you reality, right? So it just may not be our year. And I think sometimes we go into the year, we're so optimistic. We're like, yes, this is our year. This is the year, I'm going to flourish. I'm going to accomplish all that I set out to do. And you get to like March, April, and your year is looking kind of similar to the last year. And I'm here to tell you why, honestly. So don't get discouraged. Don't, feel down. Don't blame God. Don't blame yourself. But just know that it just may not be your season. And it's okay. So in life, there are seasons. There's a seasons for everything. In Ecclesiastes, 3:1-8, it talks about, "For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck what is planted, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down, and a time to build up, a time to weep, and a time to laugh." And we go all the way down to 8, and it says, "A time to love, and a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace." And it basically is telling you that there's seasons for everything in life. And I think for us, we think that our life is one big season. And it's not. Like, our life is not one big season. There are seasons within seasons in our life. And in my devotional time, I was reading about Joseph. And if you don't know about Joseph, go read about Joseph. It's in Genesis. I think the meat and potatoes really start at like chapter 37. Or chapter 34, one of them. But go read it. Start the story of Joseph. And basically Joseph went through several seasons of his life. He had seasons within seasons, and he still came out on top. So when we talk about all things working together for our good, you have to recognize that regardless of the season, you have to remain faithful. Not just faithful to, people around you, or faithful to yourself, but faithful to the process and faithful to the purpose that God has placed over your life. Joseph, he was basically a favorite of his father's favorite child, because he basically was a child that came later in his father's life from a wife that was like barren. So basically she was infertile. She couldn't have kids for like several years until basically they got older in life. And Joseph was one of those like chosen children. Like, I think we all kind of feel some type of like chosenness within us. Whether it's favoritism from our parents, whether it's, that influence that you have around your friends, at work. So basically his brothers were jealous of him, and they ended up selling him off into slavery. So Joseph became a servant in Egypt. And while he was there, God blessed him. Like, you would think that he would be like, "Dang, man, my family really betrayed me. Like, they really betrayed me." And I think that sometimes the things that we do, we kind of allow what has been done to us to keep us at that same event, like forever. Like, our bodies, our minds does not know the difference. So every time we continue to relive that event in our head, we remain stuck at that place in time. So for Joseph, he was sold into slavery, but instead of like feeling bad for himself, instead of like resenting his brothers, he literally rose to the top of his servant's household, which was Potiphar. So Potiphar ended up seeing the favor that was on Joseph's life. Like everything Joseph touched succeeded. And as a servant, Joseph's like, dang, there must be some type of divine working into this man. Let me put him over, all of my, responsibilities, because I know it's going to succeed. And that's exactly what happened. So fast forward with Joseph, again, that was one season of his life, right? So then fast forward on, that same person that ended up putting Joseph into power, his wife ended up blaming Joseph, and she basically lied and said that Joseph tried to, come into her. And I don't know what I can and cannot see on YouTube yet, so use your context clues. Come into her, and basically she lied, and Joseph ended up being thrown into prison. And again, is another season of his life. This is years have passed, right? He's doing great. He got sold by his brothers. He got betrayed by his family. His family, hated him. They talked about him. They looked to basically kill him. And yet he didn't use that to stop him. So he ended up going into prison, and in prison again, because he still had those same gifts. He still had the favor of God on his life. And instead of resenting the lady because she lied on him, instead of resenting her, wishing death on her, blaming why he's in jail on her. A lot of the times we use these events in our life and kind of use those as excuses of why we feel the way we feel, why, our life is going in the way that it is. And we do not recognize the season that we're in. We have to recognize that our life is not one big season. Like Joseph, his life is not just him being a servant. He went from being a favorite of his father, first of all, then boom, he's a servant in a foreign land in Egypt. He didn't even live in Egypt. And then from there, he ended up being in prison. So he's literally going through phases of his life. But in each phase of his life, he remained faithful to God. He remained faithful to him actually serving others. And God continued to bless him on the level of which he was in that season. So while he's in prison, he continued to serve. And the chief guard of that prison ended up making him a leader of the entire prison. So I don't know how the prisons are in Egypt. I don't know how it went back then, but if you in prison and I'm in prison, but I have to listen to you, like I don't know how I feel about that. But when you are favored by God, some things just don't make sense, and in this sense, he ended up being like the top ruler, or the top chief in that prison, to where whatever he said, the other prisoners had to listen to him. So he ended up using his gifts to interpret dreams while he was in prison. And with these dreams, again, even though he was in prison, y'all, he did not stop being faithful. So him continuing to serve others, he was planting seeds that ended up germinating years later. Like when I say years, it was years later, those seeds that he planted in a season where you would think, he was down, he was, woe was me, he's throwing a pity party for himself. He's asking God, why me? Why this have to happen to me? All the things that we, tell ourselves when we have those seasons where it doesn't quite make sense to us and things doesn't seem to be going our way. We kind of, we can get in this trance where we're looking to put the reason or make sense of what we're going through on everything else around us. And instead, God is calling us to remain faithful during those seasons where things just don't make sense to you. And this is what Joseph did. Joseph was in prison and he continued to serve. He continued to use his gifts to impact others. And what he did was he interpreted the dreams of the chief cupbearer of the king. So if you know about a cupbearer in those times in Egypt, a cupbearer was someone that was very loyal to the king, because that person could easily poison the king. So literally they can make a drink for the king, put some poison in there and give it to the king, and the king had died. So you know that a cupbearer was very, very close to the king. And for Joseph, he ended up sowing those seeds unknowingly. Sowing those seeds. He was just using his gifts and serving people. But all the while, he's actually sowing seeds for that particular person that was close to the king, that he didn't even realize, or he didn't know that would actually produce a huge harvest later on in his life. So what happened was, he interpreted his dreams. He ended up telling that cupbearer, hey, when you get out of this prison, make sure you remember me. And the cupbearer like, all right, cool, I remember you. Yes, I will. Cupbearer got out. We all know, when I had the money, I ain't had a mind. But when I got the mind, I ain't had the money. So basically it was just like that. It was like, hey, when I was in prison, I had the mind. But when I got out of prison, I ain't had a mind. So basically that's what happened. Cupbearer got out of prison. He totally forgot about Joseph. Not until 2 years later that Pharaoh actually had a dream that he needs to be interpreted. And boom, that same cupbearer that was impacted by Joseph during one of Joseph's low seasons in his life, he was able to remember him. And Joseph was able to use that gift to impact not only the cupbearer's life, but impact an entire kingdom just by helping Pharaoh to interpret his dreams. So right after that, Joseph became second in command over an entire kingdom. Like an entire kingdom. So just say, let's think about if he had not done that, right? While he was in prison, he decided to blame God. He decided to, cry himself to sleep every night. He decided to not persevere. And in my last video, we talked about why it's important for you to persevere. And Joseph, not only did he persevere, but he stayed faithful. And that's something that we have to do in our life. We have to remain faithful in the different seasons of our life, because we don't know what season that we're in that we're impacting later on in life. So with that season, Joseph was able to impact Pharaoh, and Pharaoh ended up making him second in command. Joseph became ruler over the entire kingdom. Literally, the king said, the only difference between me and you is I sit on the throne and you don't. That's how powerful Joseph became. And what I'm saying to you today is, you have to recognize what season that you're in. There's a season for you to sow seeds. There's a season for you to get a harvest from those seeds that you sowed. And I think sometimes we get so frustrated because we're trying to harvest or gain a harvest from a season that we should be sowing, or a season that we are trying to heal, we're trying to thrive in. And it's like, you are operating in the wrong season. Like if I'm trying to sow seeds of watermelon in the winter, but then I'm trying to also harvest them 2 weeks later, it's not gonna cut it. Like it's gonna be immature, it's gonna be premature, and I'm not gonna be able to harvest, what a fully ripe fruit. It won't be ripe. It won't be ripe. It's going to be premature. It's going to be immature. And that's what happens to us in our lifetime, where when we move out of season, things become either a burden, we miss the correct time frame, and we just get frustrated. We get sad, we get discouraged, and we won't have to do that if we're able to recognize the season that we're in and thrive. Thrive in every season that you're in. And thriving doesn't mean that everything is going great. Thriving means to use what God has given you to continue to stay faithful. And that is something that Joseph did. Joseph used what he had. He used his gifts of interpreting dreams. He used his gifts of servitude. He used his gifts of just leadership to impact those around him. And he stayed faithful to the mission that God had put him under. So what I'm saying to you is, recognize what season that you're in. I'm sorry to tell you, every year is not your year. It's not going to be a year. And it's supposed to not be your year. If every season was a harvest season, when would the season be for sowing? Like, when would the season be for you to actually plant seeds? Like, it doesn't make sense. So if you're feeling like this is just not your year, it's okay for it to not be your year of harvest. It's okay. But what you need to do is recognize what season it is. Is it a season for you to heal? Is it a season for you to become whole? Is it a season for you to reconnect with people that are around you because you've been so isolated this entire time? Is it a season for you to learn something new that will propel you into a better future? What season is it that you're in? That is something you need to ask yourself. That is something that you need to recognize. The season that you are currently in, because it will allow you to move better. Like, it'll allow you to operate better in your life. It'll bring you much joy. You won't have those days where you're crying, where you're discouraged, where you're blaming God, you're blaming your past, you're blaming people that have done things to you. All of that will go away, honestly. And I won't say go away overnight, but it will go away because you recognize that, hey, although these people have done something to me, although my family has sold me into slavery, I'm going to remain faithful. And that is something that we have to do. So I hope this blessed you. I hope this brought some clarity to you, because we have to really stand up, and we can't allow our different seasons of our life to take us out. We just can't. And I hope this is something that blessed you. I hope it's something that brought clarity to you. And I'll see you in the next video.